Hi, welcome back to Learn an Effin' Language. I'm Ryan Olke, and in today's video I want to share with you my Chunk It method for learning languages. It's a way to make learning languages much less overwhelming and actually to make it faster, to make it more effective for you to actually learn. So I'm going to share with you a beginner level example from Russian of just learning to pronounce a simple phrase and to memorize it so that you can repeat it and use it. So no grammar whatsoever. Then I'm going to share with you an advanced level example from Spanish where we chunk out everything into smaller bits so that way you can learn at a more advanced level, but to make it easier, less overwhelming, less of a big giant task. So with that, let's dive into the examples of the Chunk It method.
Okay.
Okay, before we dive into the beginner example, I want to give you the basic 4 steps of the Chunk It method I use. Number 1 is to identify the smallest chunks of what you're trying to learn and practice those smallest chunks. Identify problem chunks that you're having difficulty with so you can hone in on those specifically, and then work on those problem chunks slowly. If you do that slowly, you actually progress much more quickly. And chunks here could be any number of things. It could be pronunciation, it could be grammar, it could be meaning or understanding, comprehension. So in this beginner example, we're going to look at basically pronunciation and memorization and just memorizing the meaning. And then in the advanced example, we'll look at a bit more into grammar and understanding meaning and more advanced grammar. Okay, so let's take a look at a beginner example using this Chunk It method. So we have a phrase here, and this phrase means nice to meet you in Russian. And basically it's a phrase that I've just memorized. I don't understand if there's grammar involved here. I don't really understand it with this particular phrase. I am learning some Russian grammar now about verbs and conjugation, but this phrase here I have just memorized. So the goal here is just to memorize it to be able to use it in response to meeting somebody who speaks Russian as a native speaker. I can say, nice to meet you. That's the only goal. So 1, if you're a beginner, allow yourself to have only this goal and to be really satisfied with just memorizing a phrase that you can actually put to use, even if you don't fully understand how it works. You just need to be able to say it, okay? Now, Russian, I find, has some pretty challenging pronunciation compared to Spanish. So the first thing we can do is do a shortcut, and we can copy each of these words and search in Forvo and hear native speakers pronouncing this. So right here, I have the first word up.
Приятно.
Приятно. So you have the option of just going to Forvo and finding different native speakers pronouncing the word or phrase. And that can help you orient yourself to pronouncing the word, where you don't have to try to figure it out yourself, especially from just reading how you're supposed to pronounce it. That would be very, very difficult. So that's honestly the smallest, quickest chunk you can do is just hear it and see if you can imitate the sound.
Приятно.
Now this word here is giving me trouble a little bit still, and I'm chunking it out. So I'm gonna give you an example. So we go over here to Forvo and we play an example. Let me play that again.
Познакомиться.
Okay, and then we have another one.
Познакомиться.
Познакомиться. I think that's pretty close now. I'm getting better at it. Познакомиться. But I had to chunk this out for sure. So now here's a really important point of the Chunk It method. Hone in on what is giving you the most trouble, okay? So this is where the Chunk It method starts to really work for you. So for me, it was this ending. And what I was doing was adding, I think, like an in here, like minca, something like that. And there's no in there, it's mitza, познакомиться. And it feels easier now, and I think I'm close, but it was really hard in the beginning. I was having a tough time pronouncing this, so I had to slow down, pronounce each chunk one at a time, познакомиться, and just focus on this, and I just repeated it. So I know that this is ца, right? Let's hear it again.
Познакомиться.
Ца. It's pretty close, I think. I'm still a little bit honing in on some of these vowels. Ца, mitza, mitza.
Познакомиться. Познакомиться.
Познакомиться, mitza, mitza, mitza. And I could go really slow. Mitza, mitza. And actually, the slow method here in Chunk It is the fast method. You will be able to pronounce things much more quickly if you just slow down. Mitza. Okay, mitza, mitza. And then speed it up. Mitza. And then go backwards. Komitsa, komitsa. Okay, I'm adding more chunks. Nakomitsa, nakomitsa, Познакомиться. Okay, so this is an example, and I'm going through this kind of rapidly here, but you can apply this chunk it method very easy to a beginner level. Hone in on the individual sounds, slow down to the chunks you're having trouble with, and then just try repeating it as slow as you can until you get it. But don't skip over the chunk that's giving you a problem. Don't just try to force it, because that's not going to work. So I'm having to do this a lot in Russian. I'm having to slow down, but I'm not worried about being a perfectionist here. I just want to get close, okay? Even with me saying this a little bit incorrectly and like adding an in here, it would still probably be close enough that a Russian speaker would have understood me, okay? But I wanted to slow down a little bit because I could tell I was missing it, and I figured I could get it pretty quickly with this chunk it method. So if you're a beginner, I encourage you to take this chunk it method with especially memorizing phrases and do it like this, okay? And you'll be able to memorize new phrases much more quickly. So break it down into the smallest chunks, find the chunks you're having trouble with, and then go slowly and then get faster with time. And then you'll be able to pronounce things and you'll memorize them really quickly, and you'll be able to spit them out, okay? Okay, now let's dive into the advanced example. And here again, it's not important if you speak Spanish or if you are studying Spanish. I'm going to read this sentence here and then I will translate it. And then I'm just going to show you an example of how I would break this down into smaller chunks in order to learn it. And I'll share with you in this example here of a little bit that was throwing me for a loop. Me sacó de onda que la maestra me dijera que no le entregué la tarea, pues se la di la semana pasada. Okay, so this sentence basically means it surprised me that the teacher said I didn't turn in the homework when I did turn it into her last week. So that's a rough translation there, but more or less that's accurate. I want to show you a couple of chunks for me that I was working with, and then show you some examples of how you might chunk this out in an advanced grammar kind of way. First, I learned a new phrase. So this is just like new vocabulary, new phrase, new memorization. Me sacó de onda is a phrase that's really more from Mexican Spanish. And it has this meaning of like, it surprised me, especially in a kind of confused way. In English, I might say it threw me for a loop, like what? How could that teacher say that? I totally turned in the homework, right? Me sacó de onda. This doesn't translate really well literally, so it's just a kind of a phrase that you have to memorize. Now there's grammar baked inside of it, but I already understand the grammar here. So for me, it's just trying it on and making sure to use it in other scenarios. So that's a chunk there. Like whenever I feel kind of surprised and confused in that way, I'm going to try to use this phrase. So that's one chunk. The other chunk that was throwing me for a little bit of use, it's sometimes pronunciation. I don't know why, but here when we go from no le entregué la tarea, pues se la di la semana pasada, sometimes my mouth wants to say pues sí la di. And partly that's not crazy because sometimes in Spanish, native speakers will say sí for emphasis that like, yes, I totally did turn that homework in. But here in this construction, we need se la di because it's like, the homework to her I gave. That's what that's saying here. But I could say, pues sí se la di la semana pasada. So here sometimes it's like a little bit of like small confusion and tongue twisting, and I just need to practice slowing this down like we did with the beginner example. Le entregué la tarea, pues se la di la semana pasada. And here I might chunk it down for me, pues se la di, pues se la di, pues se la di, pues se la di la semana pasada. Okay, gets better and smoother. The other thing that's interesting for me here is that all the grammar I totally understand, but I'm working on trying to express things more and more in a natural native-like way. And there's a lot of ways in which this sentence is constructed in a way that feels just so much more natural and more native-like. For example, don't worry, you don't need to learn Spanish. I'm giving you an example of how I'm learning in this chunk it method. Here I hone in on this chunk, pues. In English, in this kind of sentence, we say, I'm surprised the teacher said I didn't turn in the homework, when I totally did turn that homework in last week, but I totally turned that homework in. So here in Spanish, when would be cuando, but would be pero. There might be some other examples here. But for me, it was a kind of a new use to use pues, because pues often means well, then. And so I understand it totally, but for me to use that word, I'm going to use pero, or I might use cuando instead of pues. So it's a new use. So I'm going to hone in on that chunk and feel it out meaning-wise and try to reproduce it in example sentences in my own conversations with my teachers. So this is an example of trying to hone in on chunks. Now, if you know Spanish, you'll obviously identify more grammar chunks here. Like I could say, here's a chunk, me sacó de onda. This is, I'm surprised que la maestra me dijera, that the teacher told me. And here I could tell you that this is, dijera is the imperfect subjunctive in Spanish, and that's a more complicated use, and that when you say something like me sacó de onda, it triggers this use here. So, you know, I could hone in on this chunk on trying to help me with this particular form of grammar. And I might try to produce more sentences like this, but different. Okay, I'm going to say me sacó de onda que something totally else, like what surprised me in a confusing way recently, and I'm going to try to use this as a new construction. So anyways, I know that if you're not an advanced speaker of Spanish, you might be scratching your head here, but you can kind of see the method of chunking this out even for advanced grammar. We don't have to take this whole entire sentence as a sentence. We can break it down into the smallest chunks, find out where we're struggling with it, and then spend some time focusing in on just that part. And when we chunk out, especially for really advanced sentences, we make our life a lot easier, because look how many things are going on in this sentence that could overwhelm us or confuse us, and we could get really discouraged really quickly. But if we say, okay, I'm struggling with this sentence, no problem, let me break it down one chunk at a time. So if this part here is throwing for me for a loop, I'm just going to spend time understanding me sacó de onda and nothing more. This is the sentence that I'm going to look at. And if there are other bits, I'm going to hone in on that. And then later I can put this whole sentence together because I understand each of the chunks. I took each chunk one at a time. And there's so much richness in advanced grammar that just even this part, la maestra me dijera, there's so much to practice and experience there. You don't have to take this whole sentence all at once. So especially with advanced grammar, slow it down and find ways to practice just the smallest chunks that are giving you trouble, and then put the bigger chunk together later. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope this chunk it method serves you well in your language learning, and I'd love to hear how you're applying it, or if you have questions about applying this chunk it method to any other aspect of language learning. I'd love to know, and I'd be happy to create more videos in the future about this method. So if this video was helpful, I'd appreciate if you hit the like button, share it with your friends who are learning languages, and be sure to subscribe so you get notifications of when I have new videos available to help you with your language learning. So until next time, happy language learning, and see you in the next video.